Supply Chain Lunch and Learn, hosted by the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. Many of you know me. My name is John Freeze. I'm the director of the Center for Professional Education at UTC. And as we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping details for you. We are going to keep your streams muted, both audio and video for the time being. If you have questions for Matt, please type those questions into the text box, the chat box. We will keep up with those questions, and then at the end, Matt may open it up for Q&A, but we will help him keep up with the questions. On behalf of all of our partners, the Chattanooga Regional Manufacturing Association, FreightWaves, and our many stakeholders, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We have a record crowd, and we couldn't be more pleased to have this number of folks joining us. As you may know, we began doing the Lunch and Learns a couple of years ago, as an effort to engage UTC more deeply in the local supply chain community. Throughout this effort, we hope to create a network of practitioners to give and build stronger connections in and amongst themselves. We also recognize that a virtual Lunch and Learn doesn't really afford much networking time, nor lunch for that matter. So we do plan to return to normal operations at some point in the near future, but for now, we have been told it is not safe to have groups on campus. And a couple of notes about upcoming sessions. We will be doing the May Lunch and Learn on May the 15th. All right, let me scroll on down here. I made some notes of things to keep up with. A couple of dates that you may want to keep up with. May the 1st, we will be doing a CSCP webinar for our fall CSCP class. We will be sending info out through our email for that. And also on May the 15th, as I mentioned, the next virtual Lunch and Learn is going to be a partnership between UTCPE, the Center for Industrial Services, and the Chattanooga Regional Manufacturing Association. And our topic is going to be adapting to supply chain disruption. The idea is we're going to take a look at companies across Tennessee that have either changed their operating process or adapted to some new way of doing business to meet the needs of the COVID-19 crisis. All right, so without any further ado, I am going to introduce today's speaker, Matt McLelland, who is the Innovation Strategist at Covenant Transportation, located here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Innovation and transformation are critical in a new world where companies must respond to increasing customer expectation and choices. Covenant's leadership understands that organizations who proactively leverage new ideas, solutions, and processes in highly volatile business environment will not only survive, but also successfully flourish in the toughest of economic conditions. The Innovation Strategist position was created to help Covenant evaluate the changing supply chain landscape and help position its various companies to navigate emerging technologies and processes as we look for new ways to provide better business services to our customers. Matt works closely with Covenant's leadership to help them better understand new trends, innovations, and coming disruptions to the supply chain so that they can better be positioned as industry leaders, not followers. And with that, Matt McLelland, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, John. Can you hear me okay? Is my screen up?
I can hear you fine, and yes, the screen is up.
Okay, great. So thanks for tuning in today. This is actually the second Zoom presentation I've done this week, so I'm kind of getting used to how this works. Wanted to give a general presentation today on corporate social responsibility and specifically what it means for those of us in the supply chain. And because I'm in long-haul trucking, my remarks today will sort of be specific to that corner of the supply chain. But even if you're not in our vertical market in the supply chain, because I've looked at the list of the people that are participating today, and you're a little bit all over the map. So John, great job in promoting the message and getting this out. But even if you're not in our vertical market, I think you'll find my comments on corporate social responsibility helpful, especially right now during the COVID-19 crisis. And they're just overwhelming examples of corporate altruism and goodwill, how companies are quickly responding to the crisis. And we'll get into that a little bit more details. But first, I just want everybody to know that I showered, I put on a collared shirt, I'm wearing pants, I'm standing up. This is, I haven't even been out of my house. Well, I've been out of my house in the last couple of days, but I haven't been within a couple of miles of where I live in almost a week. So it's exciting to be here. to give a little context, a little bit about my role at Covenant Transportation, since a lot of you tuning in aren't from Chattanooga, we're a publicly traded logistics company with big emphasis on long-haul trucking. We're based here in Chattanooga, where UTC is, and I'm the Innovation Strategist, which means I get to spend a lot of my time thinking about the future of our industry and kind of how we plan for that future. In this graphic, you can see innovation is an area between continuous improvement and disruption. And that's actually where I get to spend a lot of my time. It's fascinating work, and it's a privilege to work for a company. And my boss is actually on this call, so a little bit of plug to my friend and boss, Ryan Rogers. But Ryan was the first person at Covenant to really appreciate the value of a role like this. And so it really feels good to work for a company that that allows us to have an innovation person in-house. So enough about me. Let's talk a little bit about corporate social responsibility. I was trying to think of a way to kick this off, and I thought of this story. In October of last year, a prospective customer asked us during part of an RFP process to explain our sustainability initiatives. And so internally, we talked a little bit about how to respond, as we felt like they really were looking for more than just a few sentences or slides about, the solar array at our corporate office, the investments we've made to improve our fleet miles per gallon, or, what were we doing for recycling? So as we started to put our response together, we quickly realized that sustainability was really part of a larger story that needed to be told. What was really important, I think what they were really looking for, and we found out later it was what was our overall position on corporate social responsibility. And a little bit of housekeeping, I'm just going to say CSR for short moving forward, because corporate social responsibility can be a mouthful. So CSR is getting a lot of attention, especially right now in this COVID-19 crisis, because it's forcing companies to look beyond business as usual. So I really want to concentrate on 5 things today. I want to spend a few minutes talking about CSR and what it means, why this should be important to any company, regardless of the vertical market you're in. What are the components or the pillars of CSR? Why is it important right now during a time of national crisis? And then my final point is why it's particularly important for those of us in the supply chain. And so a little preview to my conclusion is I want to suggest that every company here today in this audience, again, because I've looked at the list, is probably doing more to support CSR initiatives than you might think, even if you don't have a formal CSR plan. So this will make a little bit more sense at the end. So again, CSR, what it means, why it's important, what are the components, why is it important right now, and why is it important for those of us in the supply chain? All right, John, does that make sense? Let's jump in. So number one, what is it? What is CSR? And there's a lot of ways to answer this, but generally it's defined as a self-regulating business model that helps a company be more socially accountable, not just to itself, but to its stakeholders and to the public, and of course to their customers. So this slide shows a breakdown of some of the more common pillars that make up an overall CSR plan. There's no single right way to build a plan. Different vertical markets will have areas that are more important than others. So for example, at Covenant, sustainability and the environment is a big part of our CSR, largely because we burn millions of gallons of diesel fuel each year. And so like others in our industry, we want to try to minimize impact on the environment. So again, that's just a little bit of definition of CSR. I know that most people in this room are probably already familiar with it, but that'll be the definition that we use moving forward. So on to my second point, why does it matter? I thought about how to address this because I really don't think I'm naive in feeling this way, but I'm convinced that today in 2020, the average company really, in addition to making a profit and selling things, services and products, they want to do the right thing, not just because it's a marketing tool to get more business, but companies are genuinely interested in creating a culture where their purpose is more than just corporate profit. Now, I mean, I know this is true of the company that I work for. Its leadership is deeply concerned about the welfare of our employees and customers. And, we embody the values that are set forth in our corporate charter. Something else on this slide I have found is that customers are willing to spend more on a product that comes from a brand that not only makes a great product, but a company that's also concerned about issues like the environment or diversity or even the way they treat their employees. Customers are willing to spend more for that. I know I am, and we'll get to that a little bit more in a minute. CSR also matters because it creates a positive workspace that unites and inspires employees. It makes local communities better, and overall it makes the planet a cleaner place to live. So again, the culture piece is something that's really important. I can tell you from my personal experience in the last 6 months, we've had more customers ask us to explain our position in all of these areas on CSR than we have at any point in the past. It's becoming a deciding factor, I think, of how business is awarded, as we're starting to find out. I've highlighted a couple of brands here at the bottom of this slide, companies that you all recognize, but Whole Foods, Ben & Jerry's, Patagonia, Johnson & Johnson, Starbucks. These are all companies that have gone to great lengths to define their CSR plan and are benefiting because of it. So on to my third point, what are the components of CSR? And, you know, there's too many to go over in the time that we have together. So I just kind of wanted to jump on some of the major ones that I start to see come up. And the four that I've listed here: diversity, environment and sustainability, corporate philanthropy, and sort of guiding principles, ethics, or corporate culture are the ones I want to focus on. And they actually mirror the plan that we're doing at Covenant. So CSR is about balancing these things against financial profit, right? Because if you spend too much money on this, you're not going to be profitable. If you don't spend enough money on these things, then you're going to see business go away to other people. So let's unpack this just a little bit more. I would argue the biggest piece of CSR that I'm seeing today is sustainability. And it's what most people think of when the topic comes up. And for a company like ours with thousands of trucks consuming millions of gallons of diesel a year, you can imagine that this is one area where we're particularly focused. But you know, if you're a financial institution or hedge fund, then you might focus on corporate philanthropy, since your dollars have the potential to do good and you might have a lot of them. So for us, it's sustainability. And just a couple of things about sustainability. You know, as a trucking company, there are a lot of trending innovations in the area of sustainability. It's really where I spend a whole lot of my time right now. As fleets begin to explore more efficient trucks and adherence to new government guidelines that are constantly coming out, and as we start to explore alternative fuel sources like battery electric and hydrogen, we've got to balance this against the need to remain profitable, competitive, and what some people call fair and responsible logistics. So in my short time as Covenant's Innovation Strategist, I've seen so many new solutions to help in this area. It's hard to keep track. I don't really want to go into too much of that, but last year I was at a conference. Roger Nielsen, the CEO of Daimler North America, talked to us about how the future is electric, about how electric trucks are going to be a big thing. It's going to be good for the environment. It's going to be good for maintenance. They actually have their innovation fleet out on the road right now, and Covenant and myself in particular, we're on Daimler's Innovation Council and or what's called their Electric Vehicle Council. We spend a lot of time working with them, kind of identifying what some of this is going to look like. So sustainability, one of the pillars that I talked about. The next pillar deals with diversity, and we actually get a lot of questions about this. Basically, the concept of the diversity encompasses acceptance and respect. It means understanding that each individual is unique, and we're better when we recognize individual differences. So, you know, like sustainability, you could do an entire standalone presentation on the diversity component of CSR. But for the purpose of this presentation, I just wanted to point out that every time I look at a CSR plan for a major publicly traded company, diversity is always one of the cornerstones. Next is a corporate code of ethics, or in our case, Covenant's guiding principles. And this slide demonstrates our core principles. It explains how we treat our employees and our customers. It's a big part of corporate social responsibility. And we're really seeing a lot of this today as we watch how companies are reacting during this time of crisis. So that's another part of a CSR plan, another pillar. And then finally, corporate philanthropy. This is how a company and its employees give back their time and money. Most companies I research make significant investments in this area because any good CSR plan involves some aspect of charity. So for example, one of the things we do at Covenant is we have what's called VTO time, or volunteer time off. It's like PTO, but for volunteer time off. So for approved charities, we give employees paid time off to volunteer. Other companies, they give money. I've read about a lot of really progressive companies that get significant amounts of time for people to do charity work, especially right now, during a time when there's a lot of volunteering to be done with COVID. So those are the pillars of CSR. They are the four most common ones that I have found at most companies. And so as we wrap up this, my third point that I want to talk about, the pillars of it, I want to go a little bit off topic because I'd look at ignorant if I didn't cover this. But for companies who really want to get serious about CSR, there's something called a benefit corporation or a certified B corporation. So traditionally, corporate governance has been tightly linked to, the purpose of business is maximizing shareholder value, making money for shareholders. But today, we're seeing an increased emphasis on other values. And I've kind of gone over some of them already, particularly social and environmental concerns. So about 10 years ago, we started to see the emergence of something called benefit corporations or certified B corporations. And these are essentially the same. A benefit corp strives to make a positive impact on society, its workers, its community, the environment, in addition to making profit. And you also have something called a certified B Corp, which is basically all of that, but it's been certified by a nonprofit called B Lab, which exists to certify companies and make sure that they're doing all this. The bottom line is for both benefit corps and certified B Corps, they all address corporate purpose, accountability, transparency. It's all written into their corporate charters, but they still have to pay taxes and make money just like any other business. And so you can see a couple of examples. Again, Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's, Seventh Generation. These are Warby Parker is another big example that I've read a lot about. So, so now I want to kind of transition to my fourth point is CSR in a time of crisis, right? Especially today, when we're dealing with this unprecedented disruption to the economy and our lives, really, as I am here in my house talking to you on a virtual Zoom call. As I started looking into how companies and corporations respond in times of crisis, this book kept popping up as it presents several case studies for how companies respond during, challenges and difficult times, specifically economic challenges and global financial instability, even climate change. And while it doesn't necessarily cover pandemics, it does explain how a solid CSR plan guides management decisions during a crisis. It's sort of a template that executives can follow. And, speaking of how companies deal with crisis, on the right-hand side of this slide, or at least on my right-hand side of this slide, is an email I got from a few weeks ago from Chipotle, which happens to be, as Ryan Rogers can tell you, my favorite fast food restaurant when we're going through an airport. And it explains how they plan to take care of their employees during this time of COVID-19. Now, having researched these guys in the past, this course of action they're taking, which will, definitely cost them money, have an impact on their bottom line, it reflects how their values and how they value their team members in a time of crisis. And while, you could argue that it's just a gesture to show the public what a great company they are and a way to increase their market share, I know this letter isn't just a PR gimmick. It reflects a well thought out corporate social responsibility plan that existed long before this pandemic. It shows how they value their customers, their employees, and in this letter, it shows how they go to great expense in doing so. So that's one reason why I can't wait to go eat at Chipotle when all this craziness is over. And we're starting to see many examples of corporate altruism during this crisis. And while some responses are just quick, unplanned decisions that any executive makes during the normal course of business, many corporate decisions, and really I would argue most of the ones that I'm seeing were guided by pre-existing CSR plans that executives and stakeholders thought about well advance of this pandemic. And you can't always anticipate how you will respond in every scenario, acts of God, like a tornado, like we just experienced, or war, or in this case, a global pandemic. But you can make fundamental decisions about who you are as a company, who you are as a culture, how you value employees, and really just a general code of ethics that you want to follow during tough times. And so on the left-hand side of the slide is a press release from a company called Project 44 that Covenant does some business with. They provide freight visibility. They basically, on a map, show you where your trucks are. If you're a shipper, it shows you where they are, regardless of the carrier that you're using. And their founder and their CEO and I were recently traveling internationally just days before this crisis hit. And one night we were scheming how we were going to get back into the US if the borders closed, because the Trump administration had just closed the border to Europeans. And we started talking about how his executive team and him had thought about CSR years before, right when they started the company. And that strategy made it easy for them to extend the offer you see here in this press release is free use of their platform to anybody doing work to fight the pandemic. So congratulations to Matt McLelland and Project 44 and this gesture that they've made. Also to the Zoom CEO, who made his platform available for free to students and schools that needed to use this during their time off. And again, some would argue it's a marketing gimmick. I think it's more the result of a well thought out and planned CSR plan. And then of course, CEOs cutting their salaries because they want to make an effort, like before we lay off and do anything, we're going to take a little bit of a hit ourselves. And you don't really have to look very far to see other well-known brands stepping up to provide support to those on the front lines of this pandemic. It's more than just donating free stuff and executives cutting salaries. It's gestures like, the reallocation of capital and other forms of corporate volunteerism from the normal recipients, diverting that to things that are more directly related to COVID, like, for example, hospitals and first responders. So, for example, companies with a well-defined CSR plan are really asking themselves, what major COVID-19 concerns is our organization uniquely positioned to solve? Do our products, talents, and services, are they helpful right now in helping to fight this? And if so, how can we best deploy this value? And if not, how can we pivot maybe to help? And I'll get into a couple of those examples here in a second. It's like Tesla making ventilators, or in this case, New Balance. They're not making shoes, they're making masks. Doing similar, it's this sort of thing. And before I leave the slide, I want to mention one thing that I've kind of found is that most of all of the great stuff that you're seeing right now, and the decisions like New Balance is making, and Crocs here, where they're giving away free shoes, it's not being mandated by the government. It's not the administration, well, unless you're GM, I think. GM is being asked or forced to make face masks. But other than that, all of the great stuff that you're seeing right now is their own choice. And I just don't think that you would have seen that maybe 10, 20 years ago, but you're definitely seeing it today. So again, it's well thought out corporate social responsibility, I think, is the reason that we're seeing this. And then finally, you have innovation, companies that are making major pivots in their expertise and resources to help in a crisis. These two slides here are examples of Abbott Labs and it's not Walgreens, it's yeah, it is Walgreens. Yeah, so they are getting together to offer drive-through clinics where you can get COVID testing and get results in 15 minutes. And then, on this other slide, you can see that Dyson, they make vacuum cleaners. They're pivoting to make ventilators. And then, my little Chattanooga shout out here is just last week, Chattanooga's own Southern Champion Tray started production. For those of you who don't live in Chattanooga, they make paper products and food boxes and things out of paper. But one of their younger guys said, I bet we could figure out a way to make disposable CDC approved face masks. And they spent a whole bunch of time figuring out how to do it. They made some prototypes. And at the end of the day, Last week, they made their first batch run. They're going to give 100,000 of these things away to local hospitals. And as you can see from this Twitter post from my neighbor, Tad Dacus, I'm sorry, not Twitter, but LinkedIn post, they just finished their first box that they're actually selling. They're shipping them out to the West Coast. And so the government, again, didn't ask Southern Champion Trade to do this. This is a clear example of innovation in a crisis, how a company is pivoting to react. And then even our own Chattanooga Whiskey here in Chattanooga, right? They're making hand sanitizer, which, of course, sold out in less than 20 minutes. So again, these examples are all great corporate social responsibility. But before I leave this section and kind of transition to my final point, I wanted to kind of give you a little glass half empty take on CSR, because I often get into heated debates with some friends over topics around capitalism and taxes and the definition of a corporation and corporate altruism. Yes, there are some companies that don't have noble intention and are less interested in their customers than they are in their own bottom line. But in my personal experience, and here you see a couple of examples. There's the guy, Martin, can't pronounce his last name, but he's the young guy, the hedge fund guy that bought the company that jacked up the prices of an AIDS drug, like 5,000% or something crazy. In fact, he's in jail right now for 6 years because of that. And then we all know about Bernie Madoff. And there are some examples of this, but I would argue they are statistically insignificant when you look across all of the corporate landscape. This Huffington Post article, it's a little dated from 2017, argues that companies are being forced into being good. And I'd love to debate the author about some of the arguments there, because in my opinion, they're a little weak, but it would be interesting to dive in sometime and talk about the shift over the last 10 years for companies being less like that and more just out there to do good. There's just so many examples of it. There's just so many examples of it. I think that we're at a much different place in our society now. So the last point is, what are we going to do about it, right? And specifically, what does corporate social responsibility mean for those of us in the supply chain? And I've thought a lot about how I might tie this all back together. And unfortunately, I don't have a single revelation that would apply to everyone that's in the audience today. Different industries have different priorities because CSR initiatives aren't sort of evenly weighted across those 4 pillars that I talked about earlier. Again, for example, some companies are more into sustainability, others are more into corporate philanthropy. In our case, again, I mentioned this earlier, we burn millions of gallons of fuel each year. We release a lot of CO2. And so a good sustainability initiative for us and other trucking companies like us is to, how can we better deal with this? How can we look at alternative fuel? How can we look at ways to reduce idle time? Right now, we're experimenting with a technology. Actually, it's not really technology. It's a system that you can put in a truck that will allow truckers to not idle at truck stops. So when they're sleeping at night in a cab, they can turn the truck off and run their heater and their air conditioner or their inverter, so they can run microwaves and televisions and all the different things that a trucker needs in his normal course of life without having to run the engine, and be able to reduce CO2 emissions. There's a lot of things going into that right now. So that's just sort of one of the things that I see kind of on the trucking slide of the supply chain. And then, people like one of our employees that right now, I'm sure lots of companies have their employees doing great things, but this lady in one of our offices is making sandwiches for people. I think that's sort of a great thing for supply chain. I just kind of want to use this slide to make a plug for Covenant, because I've actually met her before and she really cares about our professional drivers. Another way to kind of tie this back to the supply chain, CSR in the supply chain, is that recruiters tell me that in the supply chain, jobs are becoming increasingly harder to fill. And Peter Ressler, he's on the phone right now. He works for a company that we do some business with. And he tells me he sees the same thing. It's hard for industries to find warehouse workers and truck drivers. And, we're seeing this at all levels of the supply chain. And so just as companies had to adjust their corporate policies and traditions to accommodate the current millennial generation, we need to think about creative ways in our CSR plans to make our industry, the supply chain industry, more appealing, not just with wages, but a commitment to the fact that we're coming with values and standards that resonate with their own. For example, I visited a Chick-fil-A corporate office in Atlanta. Within 10 minutes of talking to anyone there, it was crystal clear why they loved working there because of their CSR plan. And so I think for those of us in the supply chain that traditionally have jobs that are harder to fill, CSR plan that defines who you are as a company, creates an attractive work environment, an attractive corporate culture. These are things that are all in addition to money that we need to start thinking about as we put together what our positions on this will be. The final slide here is cheating just a little bit because it's not really unique to the supply chain, but it does kind of bring this presentation full circle to what got me on this journey in the first place. Last year I told you when this prospective customer asked us to explain more about our sustainability initiatives, I thought they were looking for us to highlight our green initiatives. But since then, and with literally no fewer than 15 other customers asking us similar questions, I've learned that a solid, measurable CSR plan is critical to the way prospective customers not just view us, but the way that they procure goods and services. Last month, I worked with our sales team for almost a week to complete this lengthy application using this online platform called EcoVadis. It's an online tool that a lot of Fortune 500 users or companies use to rate prospective new vendors by vertical market. So we not only had to answer all of these questions about our sustainability initiatives and our diversity and our corporate ethics and our sustainable procurement practices, but we had to prove our answers with supporting documentation from, like employee handbooks and 10K statements and things off our corporate website and press releases and basically anything that we could use to document that we were answering those questions truthfully. So again, to tie it back to supply chain, and if I wanted to leave you with one thing, it would be this. If you haven't gone through a CSR discovery process yet, I can assure you at some point in the not too distant future, you'll need to. It'll take time. It'll take a lot of executive involvement. And it'll force you to take a deep dive into every nook and cranny of your company as you begin to inventory all of your current initiatives, figure out what you're doing, and use that as a platform to kind of develop your own plan. And I would argue if you're like us at Covenant, you'll be surprised at how much of this stuff you're already doing today. We already had a lot of green sustainability initiatives in place that I was unaware of. And, it's a classic example of the right hand not being aware of what the left hand is doing. We had diversity programs being put into place. All of these things are helpful, but more believable when you have measurements and KPIs that you can sort of tie to. So I think you'll all be surprised with just how much your work you're probably already doing in these areas. And John, with that, that's what I've got for today. It's funny, 30, 40 minutes goes pretty quickly, but I think throughout this, you've been taking some questions or
Yes,
anything?
we do have a question here. One is, how does Covenant plan and execute around its corporate social responsibility strategy?
So a couple of different ways to answer that. First of all, we've sort of already been doing it. Again, it was a classic example of we've already been doing a lot of things that kind of are under the umbrella of corporate social responsibility. It's just that's not what we've been calling it. We go to great lengths to from a recycling and sustainability effort, we're Smart Way certified. We spend a lot of time tracking those measurements and making sure that that we're adhering to that. We're constantly looking at products like electric APUs, which is the device that I told you about that allows us to shut the trucks down when we're idling at truck stops. We've had a lot more attention to some diversity initiatives that we've had going on. So, John, I wish I could answer the question and tell you that we've sort of been able to start initiating some of these, but we really have just been doing it all along. Now we want to get better at it, right? And we really want to put a plan together so that when we're talking to customers, we can sort of like not only give what our initiatives are, but also give what the metrics are that we're trying to tie ourselves to. But ask me in 6 months and I'll have a better answer for you, but already we're doing a lot.
Well, and so the follow-on question to that, and I think I may know the answer. I think the answer may be it's diversified, but the question is there a single owner of Covenant's CSR strategy overall to make it more sustained throughout the organization?
So I'm going to get him in a little bit of trouble here, but I can tell you that my boss, Ryan Rogers, is our chief transformation officer. And when he was hired 2 years ago, I was one of his first hires as the innovation guy. And so it's our job to sort of think outside the box. And one of the things that he and I have been talking about a lot lately is, some companies have chief sustainability officers. They have, job roles that are kind of around what you just described. And so do we have a single person that's responsible for it? No, we don't. We have himself, we have me, we have our president, our chief, and our CEO. We collectively are sort of sharing that role. We don't have all of that in a single person, but I can tell you one of our goals for kind of finishing out our CSR plan for this year is to identify a key person for each of those 4 areas. So there'll be a key person for sustainability, a key person for diversity, which would probably be somebody in our HR department, a key person for corporate philanthropy, and a key person that's sort of the stewardship, the culture person. And so collectively, it'll be a collective role and not a single role.
Okay. Eric Neandros has a question. Eric, I'm going to unmute you and let you ask Matt your question.
Uh-oh, I'm a little worried about this one. Eric, hey, just so you'll know, Eric kind of wrote the book on this. He consults with people, and I feel like he should be doing this presentation, not me.
Well, thanks, Matt. I appreciate your second plug here today. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So, Matt, at the top of the presentation, you talked about how people are willing to pay more to companies that do the right thing, whether that's how they treat their employees or how they treat the environment. In our business, we do a lot of work with companies such as yourself, helping them to improve their environmental footprint, use technologies, generally non-diesel powered trucks and other technologies to improve, their environmental performance. But the question then becomes, are the customers that are hiring you willing to pay more because you're doing the right thing to the environment? And every time I ask that question, the answer is no. And a very short and quick no. So how do we bridge the gap between customers such as ourselves as consumers that are willing to go to Whole Foods to pay more with those types of companies then willing to pay more for their transportation services that are more sustainable?
That is a great question. And I wish that you and I could go to lunch and sort of debate that, because I've got a lot of thoughts on that. So I'll just share a couple of things that come to mind. And Mike Roth and I, who's also on this call, he and I have talked about this before. Mike is the leader of the North American Council for Freight Efficiency. So he, like I said, he and I have talked a lot about this before. But, so as a consumer who has discretionary income, like my example with Chipotle, when Chipotle makes great gestures like they made, it makes me want to spend more money with them. And especially when I have a choice, all things being the same, right? If I can choose a burrito from Qdoba or Chipotle, I'm gonna go to Chipotle because I know more about their CSR plan. I know how they treat their people. I know how they source their food. It makes me feel better. But that's all things being the same. And I think your question kind of gets into, are people willing to pay more? And in this example, for long haul transportation. And, it's interesting because I think that the answer is yes and no. Okay. I think that a younger buying crowd, and when I was at one of your conferences last year, Eric, I actually talked to this guy that was responsible for transportation purchase for Anheuser-Busch. And, he was about 30, 32 years old, and he was talking a lot about hydrogen trucks and electric trucks. And he actually said that he would be willing and has the authority to spend a little bit more on sustainable solutions because that resonates with their customers. If they can convince people that along their procurement cycle that they're actively looking to deal with their with their people they procure goods and services from in a more sustainable way, that's a message they can share with their end customer, which in turn builds brand loyalty to them. That example was true for him. But if you're Covenant Transportation and you're hauling a part or truckload of product that is not quite as visible as something like that, a lot of times people are just looking for the cheapest way to get it from point A to point B. And if you can do it in a cleaner way, that's great. But they're still going to look to do it the most affordable way. So, the answer, I think, is, we've got to do more to make some of these solutions cost neutral. For example, we're looking at a piece of technology, and Mike, you and I've talked about this, Eric, you and I've talked about this, electric APUs. These are expensive units that we can put in our trucks that will allow us to improve our fuel economy, save a little bit of money, make our drivers happier because they sleep better with these things in. It makes it easier to recruit drivers and to retain drivers. A company like Covenant or somebody else has to put up a lot of money to invest in this stuff, but over time, it allows us to produce a better product. So again, I don't want to take too much more time. It's a hard question. I think in some industries it's easier than others. It's easier in others than it is in ours.
Matt, Mike asked to contribute to that conversation, so I've unmuted him as well.
Oh yeah, go for it, Mike.
Yeah, hi everybody. So, the question is, will people pay more? One of the things we've seen in our work is the early adopters will, and they know that's sort of an investment in the future of the technology. So, but they expect that it will scale, and the pricing will come down. So, an example that you mentioned around these battery systems that will allow the truck to be shut down, when it's at a truck stop. The fleets that know that they're the first to the table with those technologies tend to pay a little more for them, but they expect that price will come down over time with scale. And so as they share their experience with it, others learn about it. That they know that the cost will come down. So, not only are there those companies that are willing to pay more because it's a more sustainable solution, but some are willing to pay more earlier on. We're seeing that with electric trucks right now, where some will pay a lot more for the electric truck, but they're not going to pay that amount when they're buying hundreds. They're going to expect it to come way down.
Great answer, Mike.
All right, Matt, a couple more questions. One is around employee engagement. How do you engage your employees around the overall concept initiative versus just thinking of the one element that they may be passionate about?
That's a great question. And I'll tell you, so just again, full transparency, there are a lot of things that we do at our company, at Covenant Transportation, that fall under CSR. Again, we have diversity initiatives, we have sustainability initiatives, but we've never collectively called it that. And to be honest with you, in the next couple of months, and again, I'm on a team of 6 people, including 3 members of our executive leadership, who want to put all this together, take an inventory, look inside of every nook and cranny, put it together, and then present it to our company kind of as a package. Like, this is, we do that really well in some areas, but we really want to do a better job of it. And, one of the things I pointed out earlier in the presentation is employees, it's one thing to get paid and get a paycheck and be happy with what you make financially. It's another thing to be proud of who you work for and what you do. We have a lot of that already without formally having a CSR plan, but I just think it's going to get better once we can formally communicate it. There are most of the Fortune 50, much of the Fortune 500 companies have formal plans that are part of their corporate communication, both internally to their customers, but also externally to their customers. And they not only have it, but they report on it every year. So they can say, these are the metrics we set for ourselves. These are the diversity metrics. These are the amount of carbon credits we wanted to save, or the amount of money and gigawatts and megawatts and things that we wanted to save, in terms of the way we consume electricity. These are some of the recycling efforts, and here's how we performed last year against those goals. And that's I think, kind of where we want to get to as a company. And again, not just because it's the right thing to do, but a lot of our customers are asking us to prove and to explain, what are we doing in these areas? When I completed this Ecovata survey, that was one of the questions on there is, are you measuring your initiatives? Are your employees engaged in them? And how are you reporting on it? Because again, customers are interested and our employees are interested. So again, I hate to say, ask me in 6 months, but we really haven't just formally communicated it in the package that I've sort of explained today as formal CSR. Does that make sense?
It does, and it helps. And so there's actually a follow-on question to that, and it's really focused on recruitment. So thinking about what you were just talking about, when you're recruiting talent, do you intentionally look for applicants that express an alignment with your CSR strategy, or are you finding that the applicants have already done the research on their end and are applying to organizations where the values are the same?
Well, so there's a couple ways to answer that. First of all, first and foremost, when we have a job posted, we're looking for the best person for that job. And which I think would anybody here would say the same thing. It's great. And then the second thing I think that's very important to us, and this is unique to Covenant, is it's really important for us to have a good culture fit. There are some people that would be, that our culture and sort of the way, not the way that our guiding principles are, it's not that they would feel uncomfortable, but they would want to work for a different sort of company. So again, we make sure there's a culture fit, and if we have a good culture fit and obviously you're qualified to do the job, then, the rest of it's gravy, right? I mean, I interviewed or helped interview somebody the other day that I felt like was really young, progressive. They had a lot of great insights into some of the things that they kind of wanted to find out more about as it related to, specifically she asked me, will you give me time off to volunteer? And ironically, we had just put in what's called a VTO program, a volunteer time off. I was like, well, actually, we have. And by the way, I think it's great that you're really interested in that. And that was sort of a perk as far as I was concerned. She could do the job. She had a great culture fit, and she was interested in some of the programs that we had just initiated. So yeah, I mean, do I value those types of things over their ability, their qualifications? Like, nah. Yeah. I need them to, if I'm hiring a computer programmer, I need them to know the language we're programming in.
Sure. All right, I think we've got a couple more questions, and then we're going to wrap it up. I promise we will get you guys out of here on time. Are there any suggested readings or sources of info that folks may want to look at if they want to continue learning about CSR?
I had a lot of fun preparing for this presentation by reading a lot about what's called B corporations and certified B corporations. So again, without repeating that slide again, these are companies that are baking a lot of this into their corporate charters. So it's part of who they are as a company. They make very specific commitments to money and time and things that they want to do to give back. And so, reading more about not just what that is, but some of the companies like Warby Parker and Patagonia that have actually gone through the B Lab certification process, that's a really interesting place to start. That book that I referenced, a guide during a time of crisis, that's a little academic. I would not recommend reading that. I poked through it, and it was good, but it was a little, it was a little academic. Yeah, the B Corporation stuff is really interesting. That's a good place to start. And then, you can contact me through LinkedIn, and I can send you a couple of companies that I feel like have really done a great job and actually put links to what their CSR initiatives are on their website.
Okay. All right. Looks like the last question. Oh, sorry. There's two more questions. Does Covenant look at your suppliers' CSR strategy?
We do a little bit, but I kind of see one of the outcomes of this process we're going through right now is to spend a little bit more time looking into that. When I completed the survey, this Ecovata survey for a major potential big customer for us, how we scored on this, and we actually got to see how we scored against our competitors as one of the benefits of going through the process. we actually did pretty well on it. And one of those areas that we had to answer is how much effort do we put into our own procurement process and the way we buy goods and services. Again, I don't have time to get into some of the specifics. Sure. Yes, we do. Probably not as much as we should is the way I would say it. So, again, if we're going to be buying office supplies and we have an option to choose between two different people, and the price is about the same, it might be an extra step we start taking is, hey, tell us a little bit more about your diversity or sustainability initiatives, because, all things being the same, that could be a deciding factor. So yeah, I see a result of one of the outcomes of this process we're going through right now would be more attention to that.
Okay. All right. Last question. Someone wanted to know if you and I share the same barber.
Yeah, we do it ourselves, right?
That's right.
Actually, I'm getting a little long right now.
Mine too.
I think somebody was going to ask about the Legos that I have on my home office on the wall behind me or something.
It may be hard to see. It's kind of in the distance for me. Well, Matt, thank you so much for sharing your insight on corporate social responsibility with us today. I think this was a really good presentation. Got a lot of good feedback from folks in the chat room today. So without any further ado, we're going to wrap this up. Just a quick reminder, May 1st, we will be doing our Certified Supply Chain Professional webinar. Emails will be going out about that. That's scheduled for 1 o'clock on May the 1st. And then on May the 15th at 12 noon, we will do our next virtual lunch and learn. And that is going to be on adjusting to supply chain disruption. And we're going to take a look at some manufacturing companies across Tennessee that have adjusted their production line to meet the need of the healthcare crisis. So we will send the presentation out to everyone that has signed up. I had a few folks ask that. So it's been recorded. We'll send that out. And if you have any questions for myself or Matt, just let us know and I will get those over to him. And as he said, you connect with him on LinkedIn. All right. Well, everyone, y'all have a great afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. This actually was really a lot of fun. So we will look forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Bye now. Thanks, Matt.